Good evening, everybody. Good evening. It's terrific to see so many people here in the snow. Welcome everyone to Kellogg College. So pleased to see you, and we're incredibly lucky to have here today Joeli, who has come on International Women's Day, and we're really, really delighted to introduce her to you. She's the founder and moving force behind Pregnant Then Screwed, and that was founded 8 years today on International Women's Day. So happy birthday to Pregnant Then Screwed. Yes. And so she's going to talk to us, as I'm sure you know, about that movement and also about her book, The Motherhood Penalty, which is on sale at the back. I've been gripped by it all week, and I'd really recommend it, and really recommend owning a copy of it, actually, because it's a very practical guide, as well as telling a narrative and a story. It's actually very practical. It's got lots of information in it that is really helpful to have, I think, at your fingertips. And there are other ways to support Pregnant Then Screwed. So do have a look at the website for the movement, for the organisation. There's a GoFundMe page, so have a look at that too if you want to find out more after this talk. So the whole movement behind Pregnant Then Screwed is really supporting women against maternity and childcare discrimination, and emphasising the knowledge of rights seems to be a really important thing that comes across in that. So one of the things I found when I was reading it was that I was like, I'll just go and Google that and check things, and had a look at University of Oxford's policies, and also the policies relating to students in this university. And one of the things that's really comes across in the book is the importance of flexibility. And as you know, Kellogg is a college for part-time students as well as full-time students, and we have many working people here who are balancing studying and working, and are mothers, parents, as well as being students or academics. So that's something that was really interesting to me. But also the emphasis on those legal structures and the fact that workplace structures can create change. So we're really delighted to welcome Joeli, and please do give her a very warm round of applause. We will be taking questions after, so there'll be lots of opportunities to ask questions.
Hello, Oxford. Thanks for coming out in the snow. Oh, it's snowing March, bloody hell. Happy International Women's Day. My favourite day of the year, obviously yours as well. Forget Christmas. International Women's Day. A whole day just for us lasses. 24 hours of feeling like we matter to other people. Wouldn't it be great if every day felt like this one? Optimistic, energetic, celebrated by everyone in business and politics, approved by management. Well, I'm here to talk to you about how we build a movement for change so that we can deal with the frustrations that you feel the other 364 days of the year. So you never have to fear the dawning of March 9th ever again. Remove this. To begin with, let me take you back to a younger, far less jaded, much less saggy version of me. The year was 2013, and I was working for a children's charity in the Northeast. It was a project that I had designed and had secured all the funding for, and I was dead excited about it because it was going to benefit some brilliant young people in a region that can often be forgotten about. A month into the project, I discovered that I was pregnant. It wasn't planned. I'll spare you the details on that one. I had done what most women do, and I had secretly, patiently vomited my way through the first trimester before informing my employer that I was expecting. Although I obviously realised that my pregnancy would likely cause them a few administrative headaches, I expected they would congratulate me and then we would start planning for my maternity leave. I informed them of my pregnancy by email and suggested a call the following day to plan my departure. Here's where the script goes wild. Instead of sending me a congratulatory message, the children's charity fired me by voicemail. They didn't give me a reason. They simply said, "We've decided to pull your contract. Please hand everything over immediately." That's how I found myself 4 months pregnant and unemployed. I had rent and bills to pay, and I was about to have a baby. Not working meant that I wouldn't even qualify for measly statutory maternity pay of £157 a week. Through a friend of a friend, I found an employment lawyer. The employment lawyer agreed that I had a strong case for discrimination and suggested they write a letter to my previous employer demanding I be compensated. That letter cost me £300, but my previous employer, the children's charity, just threw that letter in the bin. They didn't even grace it with a response. The next stage would have been to take my employer to tribunal, and I asked the employment lawyer how much that would cost, and they said, well, it's a bit of a complicated case, so it's probably going to be in the region of about £9,000. £9,000. Who has that sort of money just sloshing around in their bank account? I certainly didn't. I could barely scrape together the £300 for the letter. The following day, I attended a routine hospital appointment just to check, the baby was growing as he should be and everything was in place, only to discover that my cervix had almost vanished. My tiny 4-month-old baby was effectively hanging on by a thread. So they rushed me into surgery to do this delightful process of trying to bolt my cervix together to keep everything in place. And as I was laid on the bed afterwards, the surgeon came over and said, look, whatever you do, don't get stressed. Because stress will potentially lead to premature labour, and if the baby comes now, the baby will die. Taking an employer to tribunal is pretty much one of the most stressful things that you can do. But as you only have 3 months less 1 day to raise a tribunal claim from the point the discrimination occurs, I couldn't wait until my baby was born safely before I started proceedings. I've heard so many stories from women in the same situations. Women who are fighters, but who look at the mounting fees, the prospect of having their character picked over and accusations thrown, who are doing this with a tiny human either inside or outside of them, wholly vulnerable but very fragile. Well, the law doesn't give any wiggle room to the realities of life as a pregnant woman or mother. You could say that the law entirely fails to incorporate the lived experiences of women in the protections it pretends to offer her. According to the Equality and Human Rights Commission, just 1% of women who experience pregnancy or maternity discrimination even raise a tribunal claim. In my case, the 3-month time limit meant that I couldn't wait until my baby arrived safely before I picked up the legal case. I was forced to choose between the health of my unborn child or the justice that I so clearly deserved. I dropped the case. I had to. What other choice did I have? That moment, it almost broke me. I'd lost my job and with it what felt like a chance of a career. I was suddenly completely dependent on my partner to pay my way, to put food on the table, to keep a roof over our heads. The only thing I was good for was as a vessel for this growing fetus. And I wasn't even doing that very well. I was failing at that. In the blink of an eye, I had gone from having a successful career and being really excited about starting a family to suddenly nothing. As I lay on a sofa watching daytime TV, I realised that I was completely powerless. As a result of getting pregnant, I was now at the mercy of others. Before this moment, I would never have called myself a feminist, because until that moment, I had never experienced such overt inequality because of my biology. But from that moment on, it was as if a blindfold had been lifted and everything came into focus. For 2 years, my anger built. For 2 years, I talked to other mothers about what had happened to me and heard their stories of discrimination. Then, in 2015, this time 8 years ago, I decided to build a website that could capture our experiences and show the world what was really happening behind the closed doors of the companies who were dismissing us. That website was called Pregnant and Screwed. I'm going to take a brief diversion here. Imagine we're fitting a wide-angled lens onto this shot. So you have me reeling from my experience of pregnancy discrimination, starting to build my website, and then whoosh, here's a much bigger version of what was happening at the same time. That same year, 2015, the Equality and Human Rights Commission released their report into pregnancy and maternity discrimination. It found that 77% of working mums experience some form of discrimination in the workplace, and 54,000 women a year lose their job for daring to procreate. 54,000 women every year. That's a woman every 10 minutes in the UK. 1 in 9 pregnant women lose their job for getting pregnant. What's worse, those figures had almost doubled in 10 years. And here's where we go back to my website. So I'm sitting there in 2015 teaching myself how to build and run a WordPress page through my furious haze while breastfeeding my tiny son and changing his hot mustardy nappies. I thought I could set up a website so women could share their stories and raise the roof with our righteous anger, thinking, if people just knew, we could stop all of this. And I pressed the publish button and I waited. And I waited. And I waited. Nothing happened. Absolute radio silence. That is when I discovered the colossal, stifling power of the non-disclosure agreement. NDAs are a legal contract that is intended to protect trade secrets and intellectual property. Unfortunately, from where us mothers stand, it is also commonly used to hide wrongdoing against us. Alongside a lump sum of money, it's often presented as a confidentiality clause that hides an employer's bad behaviour from the press, from customers, from colleagues, and from future hires. The power of the NDA is such that in the end I can only start to publish women's stories if I did so anonymously. And these women often only agreed to have their stories published after prolonged, worried discussion about being identified. What was it these companies wanted to gag women from sharing? Well, I've heard from at least 100 women who told their boss that they were pregnant and their boss demanded they have an abortion if they want to keep their job. I heard from one woman who was forced to do a shot of vodka every morning to prove that she wasn't pregnant. I heard from another woman who informed her employer that she was pregnant and he said, you might want to get a coat hanger for that baby. One woman who announced her pregnancy was bullied and harassed so viciously by her colleagues and her employer that she went into labour prematurely. And when she was in the neonatal clinic with her baby who could have died, her boss called her and made her redundant. Then there was the woman who had hyperemesis, the type of morning sickness that can make you so violently unwell. Some women end up in hospital on a drip. So she was going to the bathroom 6 or 7 times a day to vomit. Her boss clearly thought that she was just skiving, so he made her vomit in a waste paper bin next to his desk in an open plan office of 60 people. Then there was the woman who worked for the same employer for 6 years. She was doing really well. Her boss told her she deserved a promotion. She had to go for an interview, but it was just a formality. The job was in the bag. Before the interview, she told her boss that she was pregnant. She didn't get the job, and when she asked her boss why, he said he had discussed things with his wife and they had decided that her priorities would change. I feel I should say here that I did say this speech would be uplifting. And I promise it will be uplifting. But in order to lift you up, we have to see how low we are to begin with. So why is having children viewed by so many people as such a huge problem? Well, the first thing to say is that our childcare system is a mess. Anybody here had to deal with the childcare system? Yes, you're all nodding. Yes, our childcare system is a mess. It's totally unaffordable for the average family. The UK has either the most expensive childcare system in the world or the third most expensive childcare system in the world, depending on how you cut the data. The average cost for a childcare place will soon be £15,000 across the UK, £19,000 in London. 3/4 of mothers who use the childcare sector say it doesn't pay for them to go to work. 3/4 of mothers say it doesn't pay for them to go to work. The impact of these costs on families goes beyond anything you could possibly imagine. Mothers are more likely to stop work or take on low-paid part-time work in order to meet their caring responsibilities. It is estimated that there are 1.7 million women who work fewer hours than they want to because of childcare costs. If we could enable those women to work the hours they want to, it would have an economic benefit of £28 billion to the economy. And then there's the parents who can't afford to have more children because of childcare. We did research with 1,630 women who have had an abortion in the last 5 years. 6 in 10 said that childcare costs were a factor in their decision. 1 in 5 said childcare costs were the key reason they terminated their pregnancy, a wanted pregnancy. Childcare is infrastructure, like roads and bridges. It's what enables people to get to work and society to function. You may have seen an article a few weeks ago where ministers decided the way they'd get stay-at-home mums back to work was to write a letter to them. As if we're all sitting at home going, oh, I hadn't thought of that. Thanks for letting me know. Meanwhile, they ignore the vital infrastructure we need so that we can have children and a career. This isn't just a big unfair mess. It is catastrophic for women's quality of life. Women currently make up around 62% of those earning less than the living wage, and almost half of single parents, the vast majority of whom are women, are living in poverty. Adding to that is a national problem with gender stereotypes that has a big impact on fathers and on workplace culture. The only way we'll have equality in the workplace is if we have equality in the home. And the only way we will have equality in the home is if we enable dads to do more of the caring. And we know they want to. 85% of dads say they would do anything to spend more time with their children. But only 2% of eligible dads use the shared parental leave scheme because the way it's been designed just doesn't make sense. It's as if somebody drunk designed a policy for parents. It's absolute nonsense. And even when dads ask for flexible working so that they can spend time with their children, it is much more likely that that request will be rejected. So they don't ask. When I asked dads to tell me what was happening to them, they told me some more awful stories. Sorry. When one dad asked his employer if he could take shared parental leave, his boss said, "Oh, right, so you're going to be playing mum for 3 months, are you? Shall I buy you a dress while you're at it?" Another dad told me that he'd been up for a promotion, but his boss had said that his promotion wouldn't go through unless he changed his request for shared parental leave. Another dad told me that while he was on shared parental leave, his boss would email him and start the message with, "Hello, Nanny." Those aren't the only dinosaurs, though. Surveys have shown that 1 in 3 Brits think that women with children under the age of 5 shouldn't be working. Only 7% of Brits think mothers should work full-time. A whopping 37% of employers say they would advertise positions for men only if the law allowed it. That's over a third of employers. As a side note, one of our previous prime ministers wrote an article in 2006 saying the children of working mothers are more likely to mug you. I know we've had a lot of prime ministers recently, but I think you can all guess which one that was. And then we wonder why dads receive pay rises and promotions when they have kids, but when women have kids, they are sidelined, demoted, dismissed, and discriminated against. By the time a woman's first child is 12 years old, her hourly pay rate is 33% behind a man's. According to a University of Columbia study, this is because men seem more dependable when they have children. Here's where the uplifting starts. Hooray! As I was building and growing Pregnant Then Screwed, it became very clear to me that this campaign wasn't just going to be about telling stories, but about making better systems, offering practical advice, and changing the story. It is so important that we change the story. I'm often invited to speak to companies about what employers can do to improve the situation and why they should. So what is it about mothers that make them such fantastically useful employees? Well, there's obviously the different lived experience, different perspective, added creativity and talent. There's also a particular skill set that comes with motherhood. A 2014 US study found that women with 2 children are the most productive people that you can hire. A study from the Federal Bank of St. Louis found that over the course of a 30-year career, mothers outperform people without children at almost every stage of the game. Researchers from Clark University found that parents, at least those committed to family life, perform better in the office. The research director said the reason is that parents learn to multitask, handle stress, and negotiate. No shit, Sherlock. Then Microsoft did some research on their employees and found that almost 2/3 of working mothers believe they've become better at doing more than one thing at a time since having kids. So if you want someone who is good at teamwork, multitasking, who is patient, can plan and project manage, who has emotional intelligence, then motherhood is pretty much the best training course for management that you can ask for. All employers need to do is not fire that person and bingo! They've got a fantastic resource at their fingertips. Do you see what a great positive story there is here? We need more people to tell it. And we need more people to challenge when that story is reduced to cliches and falsehoods. Just a few weeks ago, the BBC covered the resignation of Jacinda Ardern and Nicola Sturgeon by suggesting the former couldn't possibly have it all and the latter couldn't possibly be replaced by a woman on maternity leave. When our top broadcasters don't know how to tell the story, it's all the more important that we tell the story of what is really happening and what is really possible. When you look at the scale of the problem, it can feel like there's not much we can do about it. Like we don't have much power, like you don't have much power. But you do. I spent most of my life living in Newcastle. I can do a very good Geordie accent on command, but we'll save that for later, maybe after a drink. Newcastle feels so far removed from Westminster that it's almost like a different planet. The notion of ever influencing what was happening at government level felt entirely alien, never ever possible. But Geordies have many excellent phrases, one of them being, "Shy bairns get nout," which is possibly my second favourite phrase after "Howie man." Through Pregnant Then Screwed, I have managed to mobilise my inner Geordie and found that by deciding that I wasn't going to put up with this anymore, I discovered a sisterhood of women who felt the same. At Pregnant Then Screwed, we've created something to help women fight back against the systems that are oppressing us, bringing women together to do that. You've got to go for it now. Don't wait for discrimination to happen to you before you do something about it. I was that woman. I was that girl. I wanted for nothing, and I thought that I could have it all. I had a comfortable home and an excellent education. After university, I was not only confident, but I was qualified too. I worked really hard to prove myself to all of my employers who, interestingly, were all men. I laughed off the groping and the propositions. Feminism was for joyless women. And then I went to work for that children's charity whose CEO fired me by voicemail 4 months after I informed her that I was pregnant. If it can happen to me, it can happen to anyone. Women, this matters. Whether you have children or not, whether you want children or not. To some employers, you are a walking womb, and the chance that you might someday want to procreate is a risk that many will not bear. I appreciate that it might look easy for me to stand here saying, fight the system, in between all of your studying and your commitments and your children and all the things that you have going on in your life. But campaigning isn't just for other people. It's not something that anybody is born knowing how to do. When I first started out my campaigning basically consisted of pestering people, driving them nuts, mobilising my inner Geordie. Shy bairns, getting out. Changing the world for women means connecting women one by one by one. At Pregnant Then Screwed, we are building a movement, truly, and we are spreading optimism. Among the worry and the difficulty as women come together, I see and feel a really strong sense that people have had enough now. Anger makes you take action. That means that women are talking to their friends and colleagues about the things that are negatively impacting their lives. They're much more likely to march, to write to their MP, or to volunteer as part of a campaign. Once you've got people taking positive action against the things that are negatively affecting them, then the government wakes up. Because these are the people who are not going to vote for them in the next election. And that's the biggest motivator there is for politicians. My last thought to you all today. Women are working together to effect real change. and we succeed when we base our work on the vital principles of trusting and supporting each other. Pregnant Then Screwed is an organisation built on trust. It's an organisation that to so many women feels like home. We're not a faceless institution, but a group of women who've all got lived experience of what we are talking about. We talk about the work in a way that women feel they know us. Women tell us their life stories, their darkest moments, their biggest fears and hopes. Women feel like we are their sisters. And we are. So, on this International Women's Day, let's cheer women's optimism. Let's cheer women's anger. Let's cheer women's determination to turn today's discrimination into a better future for us all. Please support our work. Please support Pregnant Then Screwed, our merry band of sleep-deprived, rage-fueled, funny, ferocious women. Follow us on social media to participate in our campaigns and research. Donate to keep us going. If you're looking for the best training on how to make your workplace the best it can be, then book us. And never, ever forget that shy bairns get out. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for that really uplifting talk, and so many things there to discuss, and I'm sure there'll be lots of questions in the audience. So thank you very much, Joeli. We've got a roving mic going around, which Judith has there. So if anybody wants to ask a question, go for it.
It's really interesting to hear what you said. Thank you for the great talk. And yet the idea of banding together as women and mothers, very important. But could you say a little about having allies, male allies, for example, and how they could be a key part of your campaign and the wider campaign?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I believe strongly that we've got to change women's minds first. I actually think sometimes, it was a woman that pushed me out of my job. And I hear from lots of other people that women, they perpetuate patriarchy sometimes, just as much as men do. And so for me, Pregnant Then Screwed is all about reaching women and helping them to see that these systems are set up to oppress us, that they are causing us damage and problems. I'm not entirely convinced that we will fully get the change that we need without male allies, but I don't think focusing on attracting male allies is the way to do it. I think we need women supporting each other, and if we support each other and if we're angry enough, it will happen. We will get the change that we want, and men will follow along with that. So I always get the messages, what about men? The men, they work as well. Sorry to the men, I'm not saying anything bad about men. But I feel that it's really important for Pregnant Then Screwed to really focus in on women, because we are the ones that are experiencing this, and we are the ones that still are dealing with the childcare issues. We still are doing 3 times the unpaid labour. And until you make women see that, like I had a very extreme thing happen to me, which is what lifted that blindfold. But there are many women that still aren't seeing it. They haven't had the same extreme experience. So for me, it's all about reaching other women more than it's about reaching other men. But then again, ministers are all men, aren't they? All people are with stay-at-home wives or nannies, which is part of the problem. We do need some men, unfortunately.
Thank you, it was terrific, thank you. I do feminist research, and I've presented some of that sometimes, and I spectacularly upset a woman in the audience because I kept referencing the role of pregnancy and having children, and she was childless. And somebody I knew spoke to me afterwards, and I clearly had really, really offended her by over-referencing the role of motherhood and parenting in women's experiences. And it has made me think, because I've got my eldest who's 20, so I can feel the transition myself of leaving the child rearing years behind, and starting to see things a little bit differently. And I wonder whether, in your experience, focusing on the pregnancy, or whether you do just focus on pregnancy, or whether that's just the strapline kind of thing, or whether thinking about women's life cycles would put a different slant on things, and how that might fit. We think about menopause is also connected to pregnancy, but it's a different story, or is it? I'm just interested in your point of view.
Yeah, good questions. I think, women who don't have children also experience discrimination for simply having a uterus, and many of them don't realise that. A third of employers avoid hiring women just because they're of childbearing age. So I think, enabling women to recognise that is really good. And of course I get lots of comments from women who have chosen not to have children, who don't like the way that we talk about this issue. And that's fine, go and do your own thing then. But I'm going to talk about motherhood, and it's really important that we do. In terms of the life cycle, a lot of what we talk about focuses in on childcare, so it's those early years of having a child. But of course, as children get older, new problems arise. And my kids are 9 and 7 now, so you've got to deal with trying to find after school club and breakfast club. And also we're starting to get to the age where you'll have GCSEs and exams and heartbreak and all of the things that teenagers go through. I'm absolutely dreading it, I have to say. But you do see many women fall out of the workforce at that point as well. And it's all because, though, of this whole life cycle process where you have a baby. The whole system is set up so that you are the one that takes a long period of time out of work. Men don't, not because they don't want to, as we've talked about, because of the way the system is set up. So you become the primary carer. And then you understand, you become more connected to the child than the father is, and you end up doing the majority of the caring, the majority of the unpaid labour, and that never stops. So even when women are working full time, we know, and even when they're the highest earners, we know they're still doing 3 times the unpaid labour as men are. In fact, they tend to do more of it if they earn more than the man, which is really bizarre. But so, until you address that early stage, you're never going to make things better for older women. And that the gender pay gap starts from the moment that women have children. It just widens and widens and widens until there was some data out yesterday that said women's pension pots are on average, I think it was £125,000 less than men. And it's all because it doesn't get fixed. It just gets worse and worse and worse as he's getting older, because he's still doing all the unpaid labour. He's still managing to all of the issues around childcare or not childcare, but dealing with the emotions of a child. So I think until you can fix that earlier point, you're not going to fix the problems that you see later. And that's for menopause. I mean, we've talked about that being, you could turn pregnant and screwed into it being all about a uterus and how that affects women. I mean, I'm going through perimenopause at the moment. My word are the problems with the menopause and how that is viewed, how you get the treatment that you need. I had a hell of a time. But there are many great organisations now doing stuff on that, so it's not something that I think we will look at. We really want to focus on those early years of a child's life, and if we can fix that, if we can fix childcare, if we can fix parental leave, if we can fix flexible working, it will make such a difference to women's lives, all the way through the life cycle.
Hi, thanks for that. That was really enlightening. I feel like I'm your perfect demographic because I've got a toddler. I went back to work part-time after having my son.
I earn more money than my husband, but I work part-time and he works full-time. But yeah, my question is, it really struck with me when you said that a lot of women who would like to have further children choose not to because they can't afford childcare. Yeah. And that's definitely a position that I'm finding myself in. I think it's highly unlikely we would have another child until my son gets those magical 33 hours. Is there a light at the end of the tunnel for our broken childcare system?
I'm just going to say more broadly, it's not a light at the end of the tunnel. Yes, there is, yeah. So the good news is that I would have conversations with MPs and ministers about childcare 3-4 years ago, and they'd look at you like you were speaking Klingon. Like, they'd genuinely be like, why would I care about that? That is just not interesting. That has changed. We've definitely changed. And this is now on the priority list of every political party. It will, without a doubt, be the battleground at the next election, what is going to happen on childcare. Labour will do something brilliant. I don't know what it is yet, because they won't tell anybody. They're waiting. They've got it, they know what they're going to do, and they're hiding it, and they're going to pull it out, I reckon, about 4 or 5 months before the general election, because they don't want the Conservatives to copy what they've done. But I know it's going to be good because they've done the work. They've got under the skin of it, because it's complicated. Like, it sounds really easy. I just fund it and it'll be fine. It's not. It's so broken. It's in such a mess that if suddenly they said, oh, we've got the scheme and we're going to reduce costs for parents' childcare, of course the demand would massively increase, but the supply isn't there. We haven't got the workforce to deal with it. So Labour have really got under the skin. They understand what they need to do to fix it. So I think they'll come out with something brilliant. Lib Dems also care about it. I don't think they've done the same amount of work as Labour, but they will do something. And the Conservatives are going to have to. Like, they have to do something. And I think, again, they are at the moment just throwing poo at a wall and seeing what sticks. Like, they honestly have no idea what they're doing. They're like headless chickens. They can't figure it out at all. But by the time we get to the next election, they will have figured it out. What we need in the spring statement, which is on the 15th of March, is £1.75 billion in order to, because it's in such a mess, because they underfund the places by about £4 per child per hour. We've lost 5,400 childcare providers in the last year. We've lost 20,000 since March 2015. So what we need is enough money so that providers are getting the amount of money it costs to run those places, and then you can start to repair. So it's a reform and repair process that needs to happen. If we don't get that 1.75 billion in the spring statement, we've got a year and a half of hell with childcare, because costs will go up again, more providers will close, more childcare professionals will leave the workforce. But by the next election, there will be solutions. So ultimately, what I'm saying is, it's crap, and it may be worse. It may get worse for the next year and a half, but it will get better in 2 years. Does that make you feel better?
Well, it gets us 3 hours in 2 years, so
yeah.
Either way.
So I work for an unnamed government department, and it's safe to say morale is fairly low, and I see all of my male peers leaving, and I see all of my female peers who are of childbearing age staying. And I feel like we talk about part-time work and we talk about low-paid jobs, but I think there's also something about the opportunity cost during this very sort of specific period in a woman's life.
Yeah.
When you stay in a job that is secure, it's the civil service, so decent maternity pay, flexibility when you go back to work, but it's not what you necessarily want to do. And I just wondered if you could talk a bit more about that opportunity cost bit.
Yeah, it's a massive problem. You have to have worked somewhere a year before you qualify for statutory maternity pay, and particularly if you work in an organisation that gives you enhanced statutory maternity pay, you're much more likely to stay, and you sort of know where you're at, so you feel a bit safer to have a baby and know that things are going to be a bit wobbly for you personally for a while. It's definitely a problem. I mean, there is no data on this. I can't give you any statistical data on it, but without a doubt, we hear from women all the time that say, I'm coasting, I'm just coasting. And it can take you years to get pregnant, so you can coast for a really long period of time. We have talked to certain government departments about them not having that year qualifying period of working somewhere before you can access statutory maternity pay, because it does cause these problems, these opportunity gaps, as you say. Yeah, I mean, there's so many problems that need fixing. Look, things like that that people see, you know, don't really think about are really important.
Hi, thank you for coming to Oxford tonight. I've got 3 children, 2 girls who are primary age, and my eldest son is in his teens and he's disabled. And I have found myself forced out of the workforce for the last 14 years, partly due to the total absence of anywhere that he can go. Even now, at the most wonderful special school that he's at, there is no wraparound care. It doesn't exist. No breakfast club, no after school club. I went back to university. I'm partway through doing a law degree. Thankfully, it's been fully funded by the Open University through a carers scholarship, which is brilliant. But I found myself in a position now where I've now been offered a job, and the reality is I don't know what to do. I can put my girls into wraparound care, but there's nowhere for my son to go. And I'm just wondering, how many other women does that sound similar to you that you hear from? It's really hard to tell sometimes. I feel like I'm in my peers, in my group of mum friends. I'm the only one dealing with these things. So it can feel really lonely. I would say one of the most crippling elements of being a parent of a disabled child is the loneliness, because you're forced to stay in your house. And I would love to know how many other women are like me who desperately want a life outside of their home and outside of their family, who I love very much, but would also like to do other stuff too, you know, wear nice clothes and go somewhere at a set time and, you know, be with adults, and earn some money and try and change the trajectory of my own personal life, not just that of my family. And it's really hard to tell how many of us there are.
Millions. There are genuinely millions. Is that working? Yeah. One of my really good friends actually she's got a disabled son, and he won't go to school, so she has had to quit her job. She was the director of fundraising, really successful. She's had to quit her job to stay home with him. She's going to try and get him better over the next year. Because he was in such a state, and she's devastated, like absolutely devastated. And obviously it was around the only thing she could do, but it exactly the same thing. She's lonely, she's isolated, she's now completely dependent on benefits, she's a single parent, and you know, I'm watching her crumble. You know, like it's really sad to see. You know, the Sunday Times best-selling list, the top 10 in last Sunday's paper, 2 of them were about women homeschooling children. 2 of them in the top 10. Because things are so bad for disabled children right now. I mean, it breaks my heart. There's some data that's actually coming out tomorrow that I probably shouldn't say, but I mean, that the provision for disabled children in childcare is now just 18%. 18% of disabled parents with disabled children can get childcare. It's as if they've just been forgotten about, like they don't matter. And as a result, it means their parents don't matter, and that's usually their mothers. And there are genuinely well over 1 million mothers in the same position as you. And there is, I can't remember the stats on the number of mothers of disabled children that work, but it is really small.
80% work full time.
Yeah, there you go. 8% work full time. Because it doesn't work, does it? It doesn't add up. You know, the childcare system doesn't work, wraparound care doesn't work. It's really hard to get them into school. And also the appointments that you have if you have a disabled child. So you have to go to and they don't join up, do they? So you'll have like an hour appointment on Tuesday in the middle of the day, you'll have a 2-hour appointment on Monday. And there's no job where you can do that. So I've spoken to lots of mothers who have tried, and their employers have been so flexible, desperate to keep them, and they've just given up in the end because it adds up. The amount of appointments that they have to have with medical professionals just kills them off in the end anyway. And the I've forgotten the name of the, when you have a disabled child so that you can get them into any school and they...
EHCP.
That's it. And that prevents you from moving as well, doesn't it? So you
Makes
can't...
it really frightening
Yeah.
to move. To change local authorities feels
Yeah.
terrifying.
So it's really difficult to actually progress or find jobs anywhere else. So you're just completely hamstrung by the whole system. And I'd love to say something hopeful there, but I guess the hopeful thing is that we will soon potentially have a new government, and I think that government will care more than this one. Not to, you know, put my cards on the table about where I will be voting.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your story. I deeply believe that sharing the story is very, very uplifting and powerful, and kudos to you that you are pursuing your law degree. And we shouldn't seek super women around us because, you know, Wonder Women, because they are here. You know, we are all Wonder Women. We are all super women. And I was curious that as a human rights lawyer, you said that you dropped the case. I wonder if you picked it up later.
No.
No.
No. Because of the 3-month time limit,
I
so
see.
I couldn't drop it and then pick it up later. That 3-month time limit was what
It was
scuppered me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
unfortunately. And another question I wanted to say or highlight is that the postnatal depression is also an aspect that many women are going through, but it is swept under the carpet in many, many cases. I wonder if you have heard these cases and if you are campaigning for these women too. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, postnatal depression is a massive problem, and the really high rates of postnatal depression. I had really bad postnatal depression. I found it really interesting that there was a map that was leaked of the provision for women who had postnatal depression across the UK, and there were some black holes in the UK. I was in Manchester, and I remember walking into A&E with both of my kids and sitting there for 5 hours and saying, because my son wouldn't sleep, saying, I'm not leaving until this child is broken. It will not work. This child won't work. I am not working. Everything is falling apart. I need you to do something. Because I'd fallen down the stairs previous to that, and I just wasn't coping at all. And then they, after 5 hours, took me in a room, and they just looked at me and said, there's nothing we can do, and threw me back out. And honestly, because rates of suicide amongst new mums, it's the biggest killer of new mothers. And so it just chucked me out. I mean, thankfully I'm fine, obviously. But so many women aren't. And that was Manchester. And you look, Manchester was I don't know if it still is, but it was a total black hole for mental health provision for new mothers. Whereas other parts of the UK had really good provision. It's not something we campaign on because we're such a tiny team, and we've got to really, really focus in. But we did do a bit more on it in the pandemic. In the pandemic, we really changed quite a bit about what we were doing because there were just so many immediate issues that were happening. And because of our position, mothers were coming to us and saying, this is happening to me and I'm not coping very well. So we did campaigning on women giving birth alone in hospitals because that was just horrendous. 7% of women who gave birth did so completely alone in hospitals without a partner with them. There was also, they were told to wear masks while in labour. I mean, God, can you imagine trying to go through labour with a mask on? And we did lots of work on the vaccine, but we also did a lot more trying to get more provision for women who had mental health issues as a result of the challenges they'd experienced during the pandemic, particularly giving birth alone, being locked in your house just after giving birth. But as a general rule, no, it's not something we have sadly the capacity to focus on, but it is a big issue. It's a massive issue. And you often find that if women experience discrimination in the workplace when they're pregnant, they're more likely to experience postnatal depression as well. So they're linked. The two are definitely linked.
Hi. Can I just loop back really quickly to the previous
lady who asked a question about disabled children. My 4-year-old son is also disabled, and at the moment I work 3 days a week, and at the moment we're paying for a private nanny for his childcare, and of course because we're doing that we don't access the 30 hours of government funding, we don't access any benefits at all. I face a lot of discrimination, thankfully not in the workplace, but in my life trying to be a parent carer to my son. So I am in the process of angrily trying to take Oxfordshire County Council to tribunal because they are persistently breaking the law. There is no provision in Oxfordshire for children aged 5 and under for childcare at all, for specialist provision childcare, there's nothing. That's why we're having to pay for a private nanny. And I'm actually using my credit card to try and cover her salary because I actually earn less than she does. So that's just an aside there, but I just wanted to say to you that you're very much not alone, but we're facing the same issue that when he starts school in September and there's no wraparound care and there's no holiday clubs, we don't really know what the future holds for my employment essentially then. And just in terms of the discrimination from OCC, the disability social work team lead who keeps rejecting our application for our son to have a disability social worker, which he's entitled to by law so that he can access respite hours and benefits that he's entitled to. They keep turning us down, and actually in one of her responses she just said, why is the mother working? Because obviously if I quit my job I can be his carer 24/7 and then the state doesn't need to provide anything at all.
It sounds horribly familiar.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to give you both my email later. We've been talking about doing a campaign specifically focused on parents of disabled children because there's just such a mess out there. How are you funding taking them to tribunal? I'm interested. Is that too personal a question?
At the moment, I have absolutely no idea.
Yeah, because I know loads.
I just have no idea.
Because it costs a lot of money, so loads of people start the process and then stop, which is also why nothing changes, because the people who are the experiencing these problems don't have the cash to be able to fix it and change the system.
Yeah, I met with my MP about it a few times, and he went off to the council to get a response from them as to why we're not getting any provision that the government say disabled children should have and that apparently there's funding for. And each time they came back to him with a different line, I'd go back to the MP and say, actually, we are entitled to this, can you ask them this, that and the other?
Yeah.
And every time they're stonewalling us, but they're lying each time, their lies aren't consistent. But I've got all that in writing, so that helps.
Yeah, that does. But still, this is exactly the same scenario as my friend that I was talking about before with homeschooling her son. Every child is entitled to an education, and if they won't go to school or if they won't go to childcare, you are legally entitled. She has informed me of this. This is not. She tells me what she's learned as she's going. So she's fighting to have somebody who comes to homeschool her son at home in a place where he is confident and comfortable. But she's just hitting brick walls every single time. They're doing everything in their power to not fund it.
There's masses of variation between LAs.
Yeah,
so because your son is not compulsory school age yet.
But the EHCP is from birth until 25.
Yes.
And the provision that local authorities are giving 5 to 18-year-olds is pretty patchy. But either end of that, the EHCP is a legal document. Still nothing's been provided. But certainly in this county, there's no specialist provision being provided for the under 5s. They say there is, it doesn't exist. So I'm credit card paying.
No, you can't keep doing that, can you? I'll give you my email later.
Hello, thank you for that. I was expecting to hear positive changes I was an undergraduate here at Oxford at St Hilda's many years ago, and we had to sign a contract to say we wouldn't marry.
Yeah.
And abortion was illegal, birth control for unmarried women was illegal. And when I saw your title, I thought one of my contemporaries who innocently told her tutor that her essay was bad that week because she was suffering from early morning sickness. The tutor immediately went to the principal, Miss Kathleen Major, after which the library is called in celebration. And she was banished to Reading, and she was forbidden access to libraries, to tutorials, everything, and only allowed back 8 months pregnant to take her finals. That was what it was like in my day. And also, I'm a retired professor, but we knew that we wouldn't be shortlisted if we were married. But men, if they put down married with 2 children, that would add to their advantage. And I was a lecturer, by the way, at Durham, where there were no Geordies. They were usually Oxbridge rejects. But I fortunately lived in a village outside in County Durham, and I got to know some real Geordies. But at the interview of all males, the professor said, I naively put down I was first woman member of the Oxford Union, and I'd already published an article on gypsy women, and he said, we see you're a feminist. Would you still like the job if you couldn't teach anything about women? And this is anthropology. So I had to promise to talk and teach only about men. And when I produced my first individual course, I was told I couldn't have the word women in, so I chose race and gender. It wasn't controversial to talk about race, but what was lovely was the majority of students who enrolled were men. And there was nothing about masculinity. But I should say that one of the brilliant students is now head of St Anthony's College. But I wondered if you'd done anything about academia, because I don't think anybody would dare say, would you be still interested in the job if you couldn't teach anything about women? For a study of cultures across the world.
Oh, yes, okay. Yes. What was your name?
Judith Oakley.
Judith. Hi, Judith. I want to give you a high five. Yes. First woman. I think we're a little bit better than that now. Things have definitely improved from there. But things are still really bad in academia, particularly in academia. Students have a really tough time because they don't have employment law protecting them. So we hear often from students who say that they're pregnant and they are discouraged from continuing on their course. And of course there's no maternity leave, there's no flexible working rights, there's none of that. And if you get pushed off your course when you're pregnant, and it really genuinely does happen, there's nothing really to protect, there's no employment law, you're not employed, you're a student. And in academia as well, there are lots of people that tend to work on more temporary contracts, they'll work on fixed term contracts. And so we hear a lot of the time that when that contract comes to an end, if they're pregnant, it's not renewed, whereas it has been, for 15 years prior to that, or whatever it is, suddenly that contract isn't renewed. And again, they feel that they can't do anything about it. I mean, they actually can, it's very obvious that that's discrimination. It is in the eyes of the law, but it's not very obvious if you're on a fixed term contract. You think, well, there's not much I can do about that. They've ended the contract and that they haven't renewed it. So it happens a lot, and I think, you know, academia still is, to a degree, a bit of an old boys club. So yeah, women can really, really struggle still in academia, but it's better than that, Judy. It's better than what you said by quite some way.
Do you want to say?
No, please go.
Yes, I just want to sympathise with the two women who've raised are struggling with the children with special needs, because I've raised a child with very special needs. I hope I'm 73, and I hope your experience will be different from mine, but I more or less had to drop out of employment. Well, I went on with freelance opportunities, and then I had a real struggle in my 50s to get back into work, and that was a total revelation, being considered totally different at age 50 from when I was younger, commanding very high-powered jobs. Anyway, so a lot of sympathy, and I hope your experience will be different. I want to talk about something more positive now. I've lived in different countries, and I'm aware that the childcare, well, many of these issues are different. The state is providing differently in different countries.
Yeah.
And I was listening to, I think it was maybe Women's Hour last week or something, and it was a woman who was coming back to this country after working in Berlin, and she said that childcare was totally free in Berlin if you were working a certain number of hours.
Yeah.
And that made a big difference to women's attitude to their work and their participation. All sorts of differences flowed from that. She then came back to this country, and she was plunged into this situation, which is having a big impact on her work. So I wonder whether you have the opportunity of making comparisons, and maybe travelling to Berlin or travelling to different, visiting and seeing not just the differences in state provision, but also the impact on women and their attitude and the possibilities and opportunities for women.
I'd love to be able to. If anyone wants to pay for my flights, I haven't had the chance to visit the other countries, but I have done lots of comparisons and looking at models in other countries. It's much easier to compare us to other liberal welfare states rather than people talk about Sweden and Norway and Denmark and Iceland. Often they're the nirvana, you know, we all want to emulate those countries, but they're very different economies to the UK. And if you look at Australia, Canada, New Zealand, Japan, Switzerland, they're very similar in the way that they operate to the UK, and they're all doing better than us. But they all have very different childcare systems. So Canada has recently invested $30 billion in their childcare system to create a childcare system that costs no more than $10 a day to the user, which, you know, here we're paying upwards sometimes of £100 a day. And they did it because they tested it out in Quebec, the province of Quebec, and they found that for every dollar they invested, they got between $1.50 and $2.80 back into the wider economy. So they're like, this is great, let's just keep investing in childcare. Japan and New Zealand have really interesting models because they both we treat it like babysitting. And it's not babysitting, it's early years education. You know, unless you think kids don't learn anything before the age of 5, then you've got to treat it like it's education. And they really do that well. So they pay so in New Zealand, so many of the childcare professionals are degree qualified. They're qualified to the same level as a primary school teacher. And they're paid really well. And they fund the childcare based on the quality. So the higher quality your provision is, the more money you get from the government. So that money can then trickle down to the parents. So it's more cost effective for the parents as well. So it incentivises quality all the way. And I think that's a really good model and something that we should try and emulate as we're rebuilding the sector, because what we've seen from the Conservative Party so far has been about papering over the cracks, about ways that we can just make it as cheap as possible without thinking at all about the children. You know, all of the extending ratios nonsense that Liz Truss was talking about simply reduces the quality, puts children in more danger, does nothing to make the workforce feel valued when they are doing one of the most important jobs in the world and one of the hardest jobs in the world. So as we rebuild this, we've got to get it right, and I think we've got to look at other countries like New Zealand, like Japan, and make sure that we put the child at the centre, and as a result, the parents will benefit from that as well. But you know, I mean, every country, Germany's doing great, Estonia is doing great, France, they're all doing better than we are. All of them. I can't think of a single country that isn't.
I'm afraid we have to wrap it up there. I'll just grab the mic for you. And I can see that there are still questions in the audience, and the questions could go on and on. There is an opportunity to ask those questions to Joeli over drinks. So please stay, have a drink, ask Joeli whatever you'd like to ask her. I just wanted to thank Judith Holder, who has been running around with a microphone, but is actually the moving force behind this evening's event, and has done brilliantly to connect us with Joeli and to bring her into Kellogg Casino. So thank you very much. Well, I really want to thank you once again for giving up your time this evening on International Women's Day, and for really fascinating conversation. Do buy the book, go on the website, have a look, and support Joeli's work. And thank you very much again.